So Be'ezrat Hashem, the shiur is being recorded. Okay. Questions, comments, discussion, always welcome. Don't be afraid to participate, to discuss. On the one hand, we want it to be learning and not only friends discussing with one another. On the other hand, we don't want this to be a very one-sided lecture without discussion. If there are issues that I mentioned that are not clear, if I wasn't clear, if you didn't understand something, if you want to disagree, if you want to ask a question, raise an idea which could be a different perspective, please feel absolutely free to do so. Everything is welcome, including constructive feedback is also helpful, whether it's during the shiur and also after the shiur. By the way, I am going to write down my, this is privately, no, I need to do this to everyone. Type message, no, that will not go to who I want to. Somebody who has my phone number, please write down my phone number on the chat for everyone, because I only see the chat to people privately right now. If someone can please write down my phone number. Anyone who wants to raise a topic that could be, that they would want to be discussed in this shiur, please feel free to write to me, to write me a short message on the WhatsApp and ask me to call you, and I'll understand your request.
Say your phone number. Say your phone number and I'll type it into everyone.
Okay,
I've got it here. I'm doing it now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other, I will soon give a general idea of what kind of order I see for the topics that we can discuss. But if there are other questions, Leslie, you mentioned maybe the topic that I wasn't thinking of. Any other issues? If you want my email, you want my phone number, please feel free to contact, write me a message about what you would want to discuss. I would ask everyone just to make sure you're on mute. Just because our background, but whenever you want to participate, feel free to open your mute and jump right in. Right, someone discussing some family talking. So if you can please check you're on mute.
No, she can come, but I just don't want to embarrass it.
Okay, someone please check. There's some noise in the background. It will be helpful. Thank you.
Again? You got over that.
Sorry, still somebody discussing in the background. Can you please check?
You can mute everyone. You should be able to mute everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Again, so you can raise additional questions. Find, if you don't have my contact information, get it from a friend here in the group, and feel free to raise a question with me that you would like to discuss in the shiur. And as I said, constructive feedback. This is a good idea. This wasn't so clear. This wasn't so interesting. Whatever it is, constructive feedback is welcome, is helpful. It doesn't insult me. It's only helpful. We need to have an understanding here. Please feel free to raise it. I want to say something about, without getting into details of a long list, but the idea of what kind of questions we will be discussing. And I will put it in a specific order. And I will say the order is Hashem, Torah shebichtav, Torah sheba'al peh, and modern world. Meaning, belief in Hashem, proof that Hashem exists. Is there proof? Why isn't there proof? Do you like this proof or that proof, or all kinds of things like that? Torah min hashamayim, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Ma'amad al Sinai. How do we know that the Torah is from God? There seem to be things that refute things that are written in the Torah. Maybe historical knowledge, maybe archaeological knowledge, maybe natural sciences that contradict something that the Torah says, whether it's the age of the world or something else described in the description of creation, of the Bria. That's Torah shebichtav. Different sciences that clash with what the Torah says. Torah shebe'al peh. Why do the rabbis have the authority? What if I disagree with them? Who gave them the authority? What about things changing throughout history? A tradition and changes. We do see that some things in the Torah evolve and change over generations. It's hard to deny that. Some people deny it, but I don't think on this group that we will totally deny that. So what does that mean? So is the Torah eternal, or is the Torah not eternal? Is it just clay that whoever wants to can play around with it, and where does it go? If it does change, so why can't I be the one to decide what to change, and so on? So all these can be questions. And then questions of Torah and moral issues, Torah and modern values. Sometimes they clash. Liberalism, freedom, personal individual freedom and liberalism is something that is very powerful in the world today, but it seems to contradict the idea that we all are obligated to take upon ourselves the yoke of the Torah. So either I have freedom to make my own decisions in life, or someone else has freedom to make their decisions, or I can say to them, no, you have to keep the Torah. Now, let's be honest. Is any one of us willing to give up their own personal freedom? I'm not. So can I say to someone else, oh, you have to keep the Torah? What is this? How does this relate to rules in the Torah, where the Sanhedrin are going to punish someone who doesn't keep Shabbat or some other mitzvah? So how do we reconcile what we see in the Torah and our own modern values? Can they be reconciled? So all these are different kinds of questions. I think this gives us enough material for a year or two or three. But of course, within this, there are many different details. Or one other example I have to mention is the Shoah. I think you cannot overlook and ignore the terrible, the measure of how catastrophic the Shoah, how cruel the Shoah is, and say, let's just skip over that because I can't answer that question. Let's deal with the question. So we will, at one point, deal with this question as one of our questions. And as I said, this is a general overview of things that we will discuss. Please feel free to raise with me other questions that you would like that we should discuss with time. The first question that I'd like to start with a little bit of an overview of what we're discussing, of what it means to discuss challenges of Emunah. And what does it mean, challenges of Emunah? Let me ask you one other question before we get to that. Do you like the headline, Challenges of Emunah in Our Time? I want to make a flyer and spread the word. Is that a good headline? Do you want to suggest a change in that headline? Again, you can write to me if you think it should be different. Is there a certain idea of a way we should present this so that we can spread it to other people? Please feel free to tell me. When I say challenges of Emunah in our times, in our days, are the challenges really different? On the one hand, different generations do have different challenges. I'll give a few examples just to give an overview without getting into details. Avraham Avinu and Sarai Imenu had a challenge that you and I don't have. A 99-year-old man and an 89-year-old woman, without, at least she doesn't have children, and they're promised by Hashem they're going to create a great nation, and they're all alone in the world. All alone in the world. They're going to create a great nation. They're being given a tremendous promise, and they don't see it being realized in the world that they live in. That's a challenge that you and I don't face. That's one kind of challenge. Or another aspect which is unique about their challenge is their background, where they come from, how they come to Emunah, how they come to monotheism. These are things that are unique to Avraham and Sarah. If I look at a totally different generation, I think of all of our great-great-great-grandparents throughout 2,000, almost 2,000 years, or maybe more in some ways, where they were promised that there is going to be Geulah, there's going to be redemption. And they waited 100 years and it didn't happen. And they waited another 100 years and it didn't happen. And they waited another 300 years and there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And they waited another 200 years and then it became a Christian world and then a Muslim world, and they waited another 200 years, and Eretz Yisrael was conquered by another nation, but no sign of return from the exiles, of gathering of the exiles, of Am Yisrael reviving its vitality. They had no sign, sorry, someone wants to join. They had no sign that any such thing was on its way. And they kept up their Emunah. That's a tremendous challenge of Emunah. For me, they are a tremendous chizuk. They strengthen my faith. But, and on the other hand, I think my challenges, whatever challenges I have, they're lesser than their challenges. Maybe someone else feels otherwise. But each generation and its challenges. We mentioned the Shoah. Wow. Can you compare that challenge to any other challenge? A Jew in the Shoah, keeping his faith, her faith. I'd like to mention an interesting statistic. Obviously, if there's a Jew who lost their faith during the Shoah, no one of us will be judgmental of that. I'm sure we all agree that no one can be judgmental. I don't think we can be judgmental of anyone in any generation losing their faith, because I don't know what challenges they have and what goes on in their life and their personality and their mind. But certainly in the time of the Shoah, how could I possibly think of judging a Jew who loses their faith in that time? But the interesting statistic is that there were many Jews who lost their faith in the time of the Shoah, but there is more or less the same number of Jews who came back to their faith in the time of the Shoah. Fascinating. I didn't do the research. It's not that I can stand behind this and justify and prove that this statistic is true. But certainly there are people who lost their faith in the Shoah, and there are people who rediscovered their faith, dafka, in the Shoah. What I want to say using this statistic is that it's not objective. There is not anything that is absolutely objective of what causes a person to strengthen their faith or to lose their faith. You can react, any two people can react differently to the same events, to the same background, to the same kind of circumstances. So it's all a question, a very big question, a very complex question, but we all have to try and gain tools of how to deal with these issues. And it's never going to be easy and simple, but it's never objective that this strengthens faith and this weakens faith, because two different people react to the same things two different ways. And then I come to challenges that are unique in our times. Some challenges are the same throughout history. Some challenges exist in different times, and at the same time, they have a little bit of a unique twist in different times. And some challenges are unique to specific generations. And I want to say that, for instance, the challenge of the Shoah is unique to the generation of the Shoah. And one of my Rebbes, Rav Yehuda Amital, who was himself a Holocaust survivor, he was not in a death camp, but he was in work camps. And he survived and made Aliyah and was a Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And he says that our generation has to look at Emunah through the perspective of the people who went through the Shoah. And I must say that being maybe 30 or 40 years younger than Rav Amital, I already feel differently than he did about this question. So each generation, even in a span of a few decades, a difference of a few decades, each generation may see it differently, or individuals may see it differently. But I think, for instance, the number one unique challenge of our generation is what I said before, is freedom and liberalism. I have freedom. You can't tell me what to do. I will choose. Maybe I'll choose to keep Shabbat, but not Kashrut. Maybe I'll choose to keep parts of Shabbat. I have freedom. You can't tell me to keep all of 613 mitzvot. So I think this is a very unique challenge that did not exist in previous generations, at least not with the power, with the energy, the tremendous energy that it has in today's world. And I think that's one example of the uniqueness of this challenge in our days, and also some questions of science, because science in the past was very wishy-washy, was very, tried to theorize, make theories. If you've studied some of Aristotle's science, the way he understood physics and astronomy, you know, there were circles, there was these like rings coming all the way down from heaven to earth, like what do you call them? Like the old watches used to have, you know, these circles that turn one another. What are they called? Like
Gears.
gears, right? Like gears, exactly. And that was what made this world function. And how is it that we don't see these gears coming down from heaven all the way down to earth? Because they're made of more subtle matter, which is more subtle and delicate and spiritual than the matter of earth, and that's why we don't see them. And the stars that are, I'm sorry that I need help with my English, the stars that are what we call in Hebrew kochvei lechet, stars that we see them moving. Planets, but planets that are not static, that are...
Galaxies.
Comets.
Okay.
Galaxies.
In any case, that we see them moving, but how is it that they don't fall? And Aristotelical physics believed that they were set in these gears, and each one had its place. That's what was holding it in place, and so on. So of course today's science is so much more based and so much more factual, and much more factual than theoretical than in the past. And because of that, this creates a challenge for faith, because it seems to contradict some things that are written in the Torah. If in the past science seemed to contradict something in the Torah, you would say, oh, come on, the scientists don't have any real proof of what their theories are. But today, science is so based on fact and clear scientific knowledge that if it seems to contradict something in the Torah, it seems to be a much greater challenge than in previous generations. So I'm just touching upon the differences between generations and what different kinds of challenges we may have in different generations. And before I move on to the next point, I'm inviting if anyone wants to make a comment on what I've said so far. Okay. I also want to discuss, please, yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Just an interesting on you, I don't think.
Don, yes.
And who's a scientist, and I were having a discussion about something related to Judaism, and at one point she said, "But Don, you know, how can you believe what you believe, or how can you say that about something? In fact, it's because I choose to believe that particular thing on the basis of faith. It's a choice." And she said, "You know, I have to accept that because I see what you mean by that. You've made a choice to say that that's how you shade that kind of science in order to make it mesh your faith."
Okay, so what I would like to discuss at some point in one of our discussions, different options of how to construct that relationship between religion and science. I would like to ask when we come closer to that point, not right now. I know for youngsters, for maturing children moving from childhood to teenagers, from teenagers to young people, very often questions of religion and science are major questions. The question of evolution and the description of creation, questions of the age of the world and what is written in the scientific understanding of the age of the world and what seems to be what we learn from the Torah. And maybe for people who are more mature and older, maybe these issues aren't so what bothers us and what challenges my decisions of am I going to be a religious person and keep mitzvot or not. But nonetheless, even if it's not as challenging or not as major for us as it is for younger children, I think it's still very, very valuable and worthwhile to investigate different attitudes, different position, different constructions of the relationship between religion and science, because that enables different people to have different thoughts about what will be their choice of faith. Is your choice of faith going to be, well, I don't care what the scientists say, I believe? Or is your choice of faith going to be, I believe because this is the way it can be worked out? Or are you happy to say, oh, I love when science and religion clash because that proves that science isn't perfect? Yeah. So different people can react in different ways. Or do you like to say, I love when science and religion seem to clash because here is where I am going to learn something new about my religion? This is the opposite. So I'd like to discuss the different options of how you construct your understanding of this relationship, and we'll get to that in one of the shiurim later on. Thank you. I'd also like to discuss a little bit the... Yes, go ahead, Mark. You're on mute, Mark.
I think there's a challenge also, perhaps not this generation in particular, because you mentioned the Shoah, of course, but also there's the existence of Israel.
You wrote that, and please explain what you mean.
Israel didn't exist 75 years ago.
Right.
The challenge to integrate, and you've touched, many of the shiurim have touched on this, the challenge of how do we adapt from a stateless people to a people with a state.
What is besides, in other words, let me see if I'm understanding correctly what you're saying. For me, the existence of the state of Israel, or even what we saw as the beginning of the gathering of the exiles, even before the Shoah, but certainly since the establishment of the state of Israel, is a tremendous strengthening for my faith, because something that was promised thousands of years ago is being realized in spite of all these generations of my great-great-grandparents who never saw a drop of light at the end of the tunnel. But it is also a challenge in the sense that, okay, now what does it mean? It's not enough just to be a modern state. It's not enough just to keep the rules of halakha. We have to put together a Jewish state that realizes Jewish values, moral values. That's very challenging. Absolutely. And look at where we are now, and look at the argument between different religious groups about how to run a state that's dealing with Corona. Wow. I don't want to be anti to someone specific right now, but it's such a challenge.
Definitely a challenge.
Leslie,
Can
did you
I
want to say something?
Yes, please. A lot of our secular Israeli friends believe in that things like Sukkah, Seder, Rosh Hashanah, they're all traditions which they keep, but they believe that they're here. So why do you need religion? You know, Israel, it's a cultural thing. They wouldn't dream of their children marrying out because they're here. You know, they don't need, inverted commas, they don't need religion.
Okay, very good. And I would add to that perspective of your question, the other side of that coin, and ask what is the significance of religion throughout all the years and all the places that we were in Galut, and how is that different from the significance of religion when we are creating a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael? Is it the same thing? Is Kashrut and Shabbat and many other issues the exact same thing? Maybe some things are different, some things are the same, or is it a totally different picture? Good issue, good point. Okay, I'd also like to discuss the significance of asking questions when it comes to faith, because obviously there are people who are against raising any questions because it's dangerous, because if you're allowed to ask questions, you might actually start thinking and reach conclusions of lack of faith, of heresy, and so on. And you know, there are places in the world, of course, that educate and tell people, don't ask questions. Do not ask questions. It's a bad thing to do. It's a sin to ask questions. And they oppress in education and within and you know, educate people. When a question comes up within you, oppress it, and don't allow yourself to deal with to really think of the question. Obviously, if we are having this shiur, I think that proves that this is not our attitude, but I would still say there are two ways of looking at it. Are we saying, you know what, listen, guys, we know there are questions out there. Let's go there and refute these questions. Let's battle with them. Let's shatter them. Let's break them to pieces and show that the Torah is the absolute truth. And so you won't have to ask yourself these questions ever again, because there's no choice. We have to deal with the questions. Or is there an option that we see asking these questions and discussing them as something positive? Can our shiur be answering the questions, finding answers, showing answers to the questions? Or could our shiur be, let's seek out, let's look for the tools of how to handle these situations where we have questions. Let's hear different ideas about how to deal with question A, B, or C. So we have thoughts and ideas and directions of how we can think about them. Do we want to find a solution and answer so that you will no longer ask yourself the question? Or do we see the question as an option of growth and making progress in your own personal spiritual life? These are very different attitudes. And I would say that each one of these, and I will mention my teacher, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who taught me and many others that the valuable thing is not to hold one position and say this is the right position, but to understand the benefit of different perspectives. Certainly not every question, I would say, is positive. Let me give one example. There is, when we say the Al-Chet on Yom Kippur, we say the last one of the whole Aleph Bet. Remember, Al-Chet shechatanu lefanecha be'ones uveratzon. We start with Aleph, we go through the whole Aleph Bet. And we come at the end to the last one is Al-Chet shechatanu lefanecha be'timhon levav. What does timhon levav mean? If anyone has on the shelf right near you a machzor of Yom Kippur with English, I don't have a machzor with English at home. If anyone has, you can just reach out your hand and pull down from the shelf the machzor of Yom Kippur and tell us what is the English translation of timahon levav. I will try and explain myself. Tamea in Hebrew is you are dumbfounded by something. Something looks to you astonishing. What does it mean that I sinned a sin of timahon levav? Does that mean that if I think about something that God did in the world, I have a big question mark about it, that I am sinning the sin of timhon levav? I see in my Zoom boxes that Leslie got up and found a machzor for Yom Kippur. So we'll give you a few seconds to find the translation of timhon levav. And then Neidel home, they're looking for two different machzorim of Yom Kippur. So does that mean that if you have a question mark, you have a question, you have something in your life that ends with a question mark about something that God did, that's a sin of timhon levav, I have to erase all my question marks? Okay, Leslie, you have a translation for us?
Yes, and for the sin that we've sinned before you through confusion of the heart.
Okay, thank you.
What does that mean?
Thank you. I don't like the translation. Thank you for looking it up. Confusion. There are situations where I'm confused. I'm not sure what the right answer is. I wouldn't see that as a sin. So I'm taking this opportunity to, if someone else found another translation, please tell us. I'm taking this opportunity to say that my understanding of timhon levav is when I ridicule something. When I look, listen, for... go ahead.
The Torah tidbits says, this is through confusion, which refers God's hand by doubting the validity.
Doubting the validity of something that God does. Okay, that's stronger, that's better. There's a difference between asking a question about the validity of what God does and between doubting the validity of what God does. And that brings me close to the point that I want to make. Because it's one thing, for instance, look at kibud av va'em, respecting your parents. It's one thing to ask your parent a question and say, why do you say this? It doesn't, I'm sorry, I don't understand the logic of it. Or I question whether you're right or wrong. It's legitimate for a child to say about and even to the face of a parent, I'm not sure I agree with you. It's another thing to say, oh, you're stupid. You're an idiot. That's idiotic. That's ridiculous. So take that difference and say, or this is a scale. There are different points along a certain scale where you could be. And it's one thing to say, God, why do you do that? And we can all easily think of people in Tanakh who said to Hashem, wait, is this the right thing to do? They didn't say, oh God, what are you doing? That's wrong. They didn't ridicule God. They were in confusion. They had a question. They stood up on their 2 feet and they stood for their own position and they argued with God. And God did not say, oh, lightning, I'm striking you with lightning. Shut up, you're not allowed to ask that question. We do have a midrash like that about certain situations in history where people are suffering, that someone says to God, why do you do this? And he says, shut up. If you don't shut up, I'm going to return the world to tohu vavohu. But that's in midrash. We do not find that in Tanakh. When Avraham Avinu argues with God, when Iyov, Job, argues with God, we don't find that kind of reaction. But it's one thing to ask a question, as Avraham Avinu does, who says to Hashem, the judge of justice, is this justice to kill all the people of stone? But he doesn't say, God, what you're doing is wrong, is ridiculous. So to ask a question is okay. Sometimes it has to be done properly. And to say, to ridicule what God says, or to say, I know better, God, what you're doing is stupid, is wrong, is immoral, to take a stand.
Is it ridicule or lezalzel?
I think of those as the same. What's the difference?
ridicule זה יותר כמו ללעוג.
לזלזל וללעוג. Whether you express it or not, I think, maybe you don't express it, but what you're really feeling is looking down upon someone. I mean, all of us sometimes do that to the government, right? We say, so look how they don't know how to deal with the corona. I'm not sure that if I was the one sitting in the chair dealing with the corona, that I would have all the answers. But he's a human being and I'm a human being. He's not my father and he's not my God. And I can say he's doing a terrible job. But I don't think it's right to feel or to express towards God, he's not doing a good job. But it's okay to say, I don't understand this. Isn't this against, and to yell out to God, like Iyov, like Avraham, isn't this against your principles? Or Moshe Rabbeinu does that. When Korach argues with Moshe, Hashem says, separate from them, I'm going to kill that whole group. And Moshe says to Hashem, one person sins and you kill all of them, the whole group. Why kill the whole group? And Hashem says, you're right. So we should discuss what is the meaning of this. Why does Hashem need man to tell him, you're not, it's a better idea to kill the person who's leading and not the whole group. But in any case, it's legitimate for a person to say to Hashem, you taught us certain moral values. Why, in this case, are you doing this? That's okay. But to say, you got it all wrong, God, that's wrong. Okay, so this is what I say is Timhon Levav. To decide that I know better than God, that would be a sin of Timhon Levav. To ask questions and seek answers is okay. And I think this brings me to another point, which is saying that if you ask questions, seek the answers. Don't just throw out questions and turn your back and walk away. If you're serious about it, seek answers to your questions. Seek directions of thinking about, discuss it with people. Read books. Look for people who will take your questions seriously and want to discuss them with you. Seek answers. Seek ways of understanding. And that's also another point about asking questions. Challenges to Emunah, they are fine, but don't just make a list of questions and then walk away. Make a list of questions and join a shiur for a year or 2 or 3 that's going to discuss these questions. That's a better way of going about it. Okay? So questions can be okay, legitimate. They can be negative. They can be negative in another way because I think this group of people who's here this evening has decided that for me this may be constructive. It might not be, this shiur might not be constructive for someone else. There may be a person who was not given the tools and the ability to retain their faith and at the same time have certain questions. And if they raise the questions, it's going to totally make their faith fall apart. And maybe they shouldn't be participating here. If the result will be for them that they are going to lose the stability of their faith, even if you give them time, a week, 2 shiurim, 4, 10 shiurim, it's just going to fall apart for them. Maybe they shouldn't be here. And the questions that we raise here, I do not raise with my grandchildren who are 4 or 5 or 6 or even 8 or 9. To be honest, my children are raising them and they do allow them to ask questions. And even at age 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, they're asking good, serious questions. I expect life in their teenage years to be very interesting and challenging in a positive way. But still at age 6 or 9, there are issues that I am not going to raise with them because they're not ready to deal with the complexity of some of the issues. So this is part of the reason I believe why sometimes the Torah is presented in a simple, even a simplistic projection of how God runs things sometimes, because, for instance, Kabbalah will discuss the ideas or the way God runs the world in a much deeper way. And in a different way, Rambam, Maimonides, in Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide of the Perplexed, will discuss it in another different way, a very Western philosophical way of thinking. And both are very deep, but the Torah is for everyone. If you want to study Kabbalah, go ahead. If you want to study Rambam's Guide of the Perplexed, go ahead. Not everyone can, not everyone has to. The Torah itself has to be for everyone, for every child at every age, and for every grown-up, those who are more learned and more capable of discussing philosophical ideas, and those who were given less tools to do that. So it doesn't scare me, and this is already dealing with one of the questions, it doesn't scare me if sometimes the Torah is presented in what seems to be a simplistic way, but it can be understood with different levels of depth underneath the surface. There's one level, superficial level, which is good for everyone. And it's okay to think, I think that's a superficial level, which was presented in a way so that everyone can connect to the Torah. And yet it is legitimate to interpret the Torah philosophically in a deeper way, which I think is a deeper understanding of the Torah itself. So here we are discussing asking questions in Emunah, in what way a question can be negative, and at the same time we've discussed how a question can be positive. Because if I'm a person who thinks a little deeper than that superficial way, and nobody ever allows me to ask a question and discover that there are serious learned rabbis who said, yes, please go ahead and understand the Torah in a deeper, more complex way, then I might lose my faith because you're not allowing me to understand it in a deeper way because I have to accept the superficial understanding, but no, maybe that superficial understanding is not right for me.
Rav Tzvi, can I ask a question?
Please, always.
When you talked before about Timhon Levav and the proper way to ask a question, my question about what you said is that it already assumes the existence of God. So there is already a dialogue. I need to ask in a certain way. I need to ask God, why are you saying that? Or why are you doing that? That's already assuming the existence. But what is the right way to ask the tougher questions of, is there a God? Does it exist?
I agree. It's not Timhon Levav, it's saying some people, you know, there are people who say, after the Shoah, I cannot believe in God. If God, I don't know if you can use the word created or brought about the Shoah, or even enabled the Shoah to happen and didn't intervene, then what kind of God is that? And I don't believe in God. That is a question that I think we will have to deal with later on at some point in our series of shiurim. I'm not going to discuss it right now, but I disagree with it. So what these people are saying is clearly, if this is what the world looks like, they're only human beings and there isn't a God, because if there was a God, he wouldn't have allowed the Shoah to happen. So my conclusion is there isn't a God. I can't say that this is, that he is being disrespectful of God because he doesn't believe in God, but I will have to deal with the question. So I would think that a person saying, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, betimhon levav, is a person who comes to shul on Yom Kippur for a reason. I agree that if a person doesn't believe in God, then he can't chap al chet, as we say. He can't, do this act of knocking on his heart and saying, I'm doing tshuva for sinning the sin of Timhon Levav. But I think as people who do believe in the Torah or have questions about our belief of how Hashem runs the world, I think it's valuable to discuss the difference between Timhon Levav and the dialogue. And I would use your word, Racheli, of dialogue. Being, ridiculing something is not being in a dialogue. If I disagree with someone and I ridicule them, I'm not opening a human being. I'm not opening a discussion. I'm stepping over them. I'm saying, you don't understand. You're an idiot. I'm ridiculing your position. I'm not creating a dialogue. And so towards Hashem, if I ridicule what Hashem does, I'm not saying I have a question, I have something that I'm trying to understand. I'm saying I know better. But if as a person who believes in God, I say, wait a minute, this pains me greatly. How can it be that Hashem does a thing like this? Rabbi Professor Eliezer Berkowitz, who lived during the Shoah, but was not himself in the Shoah. He was in Germany, but he managed to escape to Switzerland and then to the US, and later on in life to live and die in Yerushalayim, and he's buried here in Israel. But he wrote about dealing with the challenge of Emunah after the Holocaust. His book is called Faith After the Holocaust, and he says we must ask this question. It's our religious obligation to ask the question of Hashem, how could you allow the Shoah to happen? But I am asking it as a person who's in dialogue with God. That's what it's about. He says for existence, people who didn't believe in God before the Shoah, their question is not valuable because for them, this was their position before, came along the Shoah and strengthened their position, and they claim that it's because of the Shoah, but they weren't in a dialogue to begin with. A religious person who asks Hashem, how could you allow the Shoah? That's a serious question, and we have to deal with that question. And that's a question that a religious person, Rabbi Berkowitz says, you have to engage in dialogue with God about that question. You cannot allow yourself, if you're a serious religious person who believes in God, how can you not ask God this question? You're overlooking that question. But dialogue is not just a moment of I'm standing in front of another person and saying, I have a question. And then, as I said, I turn my back and walk away. So the same with God. If it's a dialogue, I'm going to stand there and try to listen. What is God's answer? So that's a serious position. That's not Timhon Levav. That's engaging in trying to understand and deepen my faith and my understanding. I see that as very positive and valuable, as long as you continue and don't just stop at that point. Bevakasha. Natan? Go ahead, Natan.
First of all, I must apologize. My son got to this laptop and changed my name and everything else. It's actually Avi, so I'm sorry about that. I'll put it right.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Avi. It's Avi Rosenfeld.
Avi. Hi, Avi.
Yeah. I think the question is like this. I mean, for me, this topic is spot on. The problem is, and my my own Holocaust. So it's left my incredible doubt, hate, love relationship with God, to be very honest with you. But I don't deny. I'm not saying I'm denying. I hate or I love. Sometimes I actually don't know if he exists or doesn't exist. Lots of crazy stuff. But you say you have to ask the questions, but I don't. I keep on getting told again and again, you're not going to get the answers, Abi. So I'm left all the time thinking, you know, at the end, Avi, I have to actually either jump on board the train of faith and I believe and let's go for it and don't ask any shyless, or I may have to take another decision, say, well, I'm not getting the answers. God is not answering me. Maybe there isn't a God.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for asking the question in a genuine way and being honest. I think this is extremely important. If we don't do that, then we can't really discuss. I wrote down your question. It is something I was hoping to get to today, but I don't think we're going to be able to get into it in depth. I will just say shortly that I would like later on, not later on today, later on and maybe in the second or third shiur, to discuss the question of the difference between finding an answer, the answer, or finding paths that I consider progress for myself. I don't think, I'm sorry to disappoint you, I don't think at the end of this series you are going to be, or I are going to be God. Okay, at the end of this series, we are not going to understand the world as well as God understands it. Let's give up on that hope. But I don't think the question of faith and questions is an issue of all or nothing. It's not either I have full answers and I understand God fully, or it's not worth looking into the issue. For some people have tried and they're so discouraged that they've tried, and we're not youngsters, those of us here tonight, okay? We're all, I didn't see exactly the faces of everyone, but let me assume there's no one here today under 30, maybe not anyone under 40. So, you know, we've been asking ourselves these questions for more than 2 or 3 years. We're not teenagers. And yet the questions continue to challenge us. And so some people get discouraged, and either they lose faith or they stop asking the questions because they don't see any hope to continue asking the questions, or they're told, don't bother with it, you're not going to find answers. And I would like to construct, and I'm not going to have time to do it today, but I would like to try and construct a position that will say, don't expect to find full answers, but if you take it seriously enough, you can find partial answers, which is more than 100% more than nothing. It's not 100%, it's not, you're not going to be God, but it is a tremendous difference. And I often get asked when I discuss this with students, aren't you discouraged? You said you're not going to find perfect answers. Aren't you discouraged? Isn't this like climbing, not the Everest? The Everest, if you really want to, apparently it's possible to climb it. I'm not interested, it's dangerous. And I don't want to spend the time and energy and money and so on. But if it's not 8 kilometers high, it's 50 kilometers high, there's no way you're going to be able to climb it. Why are you trying? And I say because I'm not going to get to the top, but every 100 meters of height that I am able to climb, my perspective is better. The views that I see are more beautiful. My understanding of what's going on down there grows and becomes better. So I would like to strengthen that kind of idea, but it will take time. That's what I would like to offer this as an option to look into with time. I'm looking for a moment here at the chat. Okay, thank you. Shlomit mentions tremendous books and thought that emerge from the Shoah. I agree. Sometimes the challenges and the questions bring us to a great depth. And Eliezer Rowan, you wanted to ask something or to say something.
I wanted to relate to what, to return to what Rachel asked.
Yes.
The existence of God. I think that there's certain you know that I'm all in favor of asking questions and trying to find out what, use that as a tool. But I think there's certain basic questions certain basic articles that one has to just start with. And I mean, it's true that there might be people who don't believe in God, but I think that in a Jewish perspective, you have to start with that. Maybe the principles of these, I don't know, but you know, that God exists and it's not it's not tangible. You know, you can't make an idol that will encompass the things. I think these are basic principles that can't really be debated because it's not Judaism anymore if you leave those principles. I mean, that God created the world is a basic.
Okay, I would like to
like
say,
a scientific axiom. This is the starting
So to
point, and
speak,
then we
yes.
build on
So
top
to
of
speak,
that.
yeah.
but I think
That's
we
right.
have to enable a person, I'm the rabbi here saying this, I think we have to enable a person to choose their Judaism in the sense of, you know, okay, so if I don't think it's right, let me choose something else. But once again, as I said before, be engaged. Don't just ask the question and turn your back and walk away. If you have a question about God's existence, about the creation of the world, it is your, if you have an option of believing in God, if you're not sure, then this may be your religious obligation to delve into the question and research it. Don't just have the question and walk away. Take time, give it effort to try and study the question seriously. And you can't just come to a rabbi one day, read one book, and be discouraged. Come to a rabbi who's going to tell you an answer and you don't like his answer, so you give up. You have to give it some serious effort. And I think that can be at least at an early stage of a person asking the question. I think that can be presented as at least a responsibility that you should take upon yourself. I would like to say, it's getting late, so I don't want to continue. I want to stop here. I want to say two things, and I'm inviting, as I said before, I'm inviting constructive feedback. We did not get done everything that I planned to get done today, but I kind of expected that I wouldn't get done everything that I wanted to get done because the issues are complex and people have ideas and reactions, and that's very valuable and positive. I just want to give an idea of where we're headed in the next shiur or maybe the next 2 or 3. One is I still want to discuss a few details of what might be positive and negative about asking questions, because I think we have to take it seriously. Also, where we have to steer away from, and also where it can bring us in a constructive and positive way. And 2, to discuss the question of, do we have proof of God's existence? Do we have absolute proof? Is there an absolute proof? And if there isn't, what is the meaning of this? Is religion weaker than other things? There are things in the world that we prove. Don't we have proof of our religious belief? Does that mean that belief is weaker than some other things that we prove in life? What is the meaning of this situation, whether there is proof or if there isn't proof? These are very initial, very beginning points that I think we need to put as foundations so that we can then move on to other questions. So that's kind of giving a perspective of where we're headed. Be'ezrat Hashem, 2 weeks from today, 1 week, 6 days, and 23 hours from now, Be'ezrat Hashem. The shiur will be every other week, because every other week at the same time we have a shiur in Hebrew in Kinol David. So every other week, 2 weeks from now, we will continue. I will end the shiur here. I don't have to leave immediately and close the Zoom if anyone wants to continue the discussion. And please feel free to give me constructive feedback and other ideas and other issues that we should discuss. So publicly, Laila Tov, and if you want to continue, I'm still.
I just
Thank you very much.
that Racheli was talking about zilzul and the concept of zilzul, and my mother made it very clear to me while davening next to her in Yom Kippur that there was a specific chet of zilzul horim and morim. So I know there's a very big difference.
She allows you to ask questions and disagree,
Yes.
but not to be mizalzel.
Exactly. I know the difference.
Okay.
Thank you, love. Laila tov.
Laila Tov.
Thank you. That was very constructive. Very good, Shir. Thank you. I do
Thank you
have
so
one.
much.
I have,
Very hard.
having studying the Gemara, you know, doing this stuff, Yomi. I know it's very
Yes.
on very shallow, but I'm beginning to wonder: is it possible to believe in God without actually having the religion? It's a serious question.
What do you mean to believe in God without having religion?
Without having a religion, you can believe in a God.
I think there are people in the world who do that.
Yeah, but I think it's studying the Gemara has actually made me take a step back and think: can I really believe in all of these things that are being discussed? And
Okay,
I'm
so
wondering whether I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing by being educated.
I think that has to do with when we get to the point of Torah shebichtav and Torah shebe'al peh. Someone asked a question here in the chat about korbanot, about animal sacrifices, and you're talking to a vegetarian. What does it mean about the Torah? And you know, many other questions, and basically the question of, is Torah eternal? If I accept that some things can evolve, and there's a way within Torah to enable them to evolve, so what does that mean about my belief in the Torah being eternal? So these are questions that we need to discuss. On the other hand, what is the level of my understanding of Torah that I'm already questioning certain halachot? You know, so there's a balance between the two. It's legitimate to ask the questions, but as we said before, I would say about Torah shebichtav and also Torah shebe'al peh, there's a difference between asking a lot of questions and between ridiculing and coming to the point of zilzul, of mocking, of feeling mockery towards the Torah. That's a very different question.
Yeah.
You presented it now as even a doubt. Is it good that I'm learning all this, or you know? You're not saying, oh, it's made me look down on the Torah, you know. So that's
No, not at all. No, it's the doubt of what I'm studying doesn't appear to really match up with what's actually in the Torah. You know, I mean, maybe I'm a Sadducees. I don't know.
No. So there's a great gap between Torah shebichtav. There's a space between Torah shebichtav and Torah shebe'al peh. How did they get from A to Z? Yeah. I don't see B, C, D, E, E, and so on along the way. And what does that mean about the Torah? That's a legitimate question.
Thank you.
What was Descartes' religion and Newton's religion? I mean, in connection with what Leslie said, I don't think Descartes had a formal religion, but he tried to prove the existence of God.
I wonder about Einstein. I mean,
Yeah.
He was born to a Jewish mother. I don't know how religious a person he was. He certainly said that once you study physics, how can you not believe in God?
Yeah.
But I don't know that he turned that into anything beyond believing in God.
Yeah.
On the one hand, and on the other hand, I would say that if you look at the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, you see that it goes from believing in God to believing in the Torah. And one of the links that is absolutely necessary philosophically to make that jump from believing in God to believing in the Torah is prophecy, is some kind of connection between God and man. So you know, if I don't understand, if I don't have a tradition of prophecy or a reason to think of prophecy, and I've never experienced prophecy, I can understand that a person believes in God and doesn't think that beyond that there's anything more to be done with it. obviously Judaism does think that there is something to say about not just believing in God, there's also something that results from that in a person's responsibility. And not only a Jew. Judaism claims that about non-Jews as well. Not 613 mitzvot, but at least 7 Noahide laws that are basically believing in God and acting morally, if I sum it up in those two things. That it's that a human being has responsibility and is not void of any responsibility.
I heard a very interesting lecture by someone named Jordan Peterson. Maybe you heard of him, and the title is "Do You Believe in God?" And he's very interesting. And eventually, he says that his conclusion is, do I dare say that I believe in God? Because it's not a question of do I believe or don't I believe, but what does it mean to my life? What's the nafka mina? What do I do differently as a result of believing in God? And then are my actions matching the statement that I believe in God? So he took it was like a really interesting, not upside down, but a completely different angle to the question of belief in God. It basically says it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not, but what do you do? What are your actions? That's how I took it. It was really very interesting.
And on the other hand, there are people who are afraid to take that step and say to themselves, I believe in God, because they're afraid then that's going to infringe on the comfort of their life, or cause all kinds of trouble. I will have to do this and I won't be allowed to do that. So that can also be something which subjectively influences a person's decisions. And on the one hand, I can't be 100% sure because I haven't met God and I don't have logical proof of God's existence or that the Torah was given from God. So why should I accept it? And on the other hand, it's not so comfortable to accept it. So maybe let's just leave it as a question mark and it doesn't mean anything to me. But that might be a reasonable position, and it might be a cop-out from taking responsibility.
Richard Dawkins was debating with Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he asked the question, Richard Dawkins is an atheist, and he asked the question, do you believe in God? And he was really quite surprised that Rabbi Sachs didn't actually say a clear-cut yes.
Okay. That goes with the topic that I said that we'll discuss. Yeah. Do we have absolute proof of God's existence? If we do, what does it mean? If we don't, what does it mean?
Leslie, can be found on YouTube? Where can I find that?
I don't know. I think so. It was an interview, a debate between the two of them. I think if you put in Jonathan Sachs and Richard Dawkins, you might come up with it on YouTube.
Okay.
If you do, you are welcome to share it with share the link with the group next time we have the shiur or something like that, or maybe we can make a WhatsApp group or something where people can send interesting YouTubes that they've seen about our topic that people would like that people could enjoy.
Okay.
Rabbi, I think you've raised like a zillion issues in this first year.
We need about a zillion years.
Yeah, and it's absolutely terrific. And I guess we're going to ask some questions, so we already know that. But I think the issue, first of all, the issue of asking questions, I think deals with respect. Do we have respect when we ask a question? And what you've said, of course, is that, if we just ask a question and walk away, we're not really interested in the answer, then we're certainly not respecting the person of whom we're asking the question. So I think it's an issue to me of respect. Are we interested in engaging in a respectful manner with another person with whom we wish to discuss this question?
I would also like, if you excuse me, Mark, that I'm kind of barging in the middle of what you're saying. I would like to look at it from a different perspective, not disagreeing with you, but it's also an interpersonal issue of my traits. It's a matter of being haughty or having a little bit of modesty. Because, if I think I know better than everyone, so I can throw out my questions and walk away. But if I think that I don't understand everything, then maybe I should ask some questions and wait for answers and not just throw them out at someone else and ignore whatever anyone else has to say.
And what's the purpose of asking the question anyway? If the person is just to show off, I know better than you, then it's not really a question. If the purpose is to learn something from somebody else, then you're certainly respecting that person. And as you say, no.
I just saw a quote, I think it was from the Dalai Lama, that he says, you know, the difference between talking and listening is that talking, you're going to be talking about something you already know. If you listen, you might learn something new.
Lovely.
I'd also like to comment, of course, on the issue of science. I think it's a fascinating issue. The so-called,
For those who are not aware, I will say that Mark is a scientist.
Sometimes. I actually came to Beersheba today for the first time in months to be in the laboratory. So I'll pretend to be a scientist for now. But it's a so-called, in my mind, I'm using the terminology carefully, it's a so-called conflict between science and religion. And I'm sure we'll discuss that at length, because personally, I do not believe that there's a conflict of any sort between science and religion. And I look forward to, you know, well, asking questions.
Okay. We're willing to accept that you'll ask questions.
I'm just going to say, Rabbi, I was just going to say that the fact that if God exists or doesn't exist is a big enough question in itself. It needs a lifetime. It takes a lifetime to work out sometimes. But the second question is if you do want to believe there is a God, then what is it actually God actually wants from us? What determines you if you are a good person in his eyes or not? The reason I'm saying that is because there seems to be machloket over everything. If you read the Torah,
Frozen.
He comes across like somebody says, you will, and then he goes into detail in two parashot. He will go into detail exactly what he will do to don't follow his laws, and it's gruesome. If you listen to the word, what he'll do is gruesome. So on one, and then you speak to somebody else, and they will tell you God is the most loving, forgiving, chesed attributes of chesed. I mean, it really is confusing. So you are forgiving, but then again, and then when you continue reading Torah, his attitude towards the people within, you know, it's, as I said, one thing is to know if there's a God or not. The other one is to know if we do believe in God, what is it actually, how do we know you're on the right page with God? I want to be, for example, comfortable. I want to have a loving God, but I'm not convinced that God really is there. Again, maybe because of the Holocaust, maybe because of other things. But I'm not convinced that the God above us is a loving God. I'm sorry, that's just the honest truth. Because I love my kids, and I know sometimes I have to reprimand one of my child does something wrong. I don't slap my kids, but I don't reprimand all my kids. So it really is for me personally, that's a confusing situation. Sorry if I'm boring anybody else about it, but
No. I wrote down two or three good questions there that I'm going to put into my list. Challenging questions, good.
thank you.
I think perhaps on the nature of investigations, Natan, if I've got your name correctly, when we sorry,
his son put his name on the Zoom.
Family Yomanima. If we embark on an investigation, it's not usually the case that we end up with an absolute answer, ever. I mean, we ask a question, and we're fond of saying, well, okay, we've answered sort of that question, but actually that question or answering that question or attempting to answer that question generates many, many, many more new questions. And so we actually never finish the investigation, but we do progress with our knowledge and our understanding.
So really, some of us, not everybody, but some of us will literally be battling with this question for lives. We'll never know until the day we pass on if what we believe is real or not real.
Perhaps that's true.
Goes back to what I said before about climbing an endless mountain, but at the same time making progress and seeing things differently as you progress, even though you'll never reach the peak. And it also has a discouraging side and it has a very encouraging side, because once you've reached the peak of the Everest, you're going to be bored for the rest of your life. So we're never going to be bored. We always have more challenges. So there's a beautiful side to that.
This is fabulous. Got to go. People, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Laila Tov, Toda Rabba.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Rabbi,
Yes.
sorry, can I ask you something? I don't want to bore everybody with this. This is such a, I don't know, for me, it's such a project. I don't know, probably it's nice, but where I am for Yom Kippur, this Yom Kippur was a very hard Yom Kippur for me. And I really didn't want to go, to be honest, I didn't want to go to shul. The davening didn't do anything for me. It's, who knows who did? Some people wrote it. They felt Kabbalistic. It was about to say, but I'm reading it. I'm going page after page of me nothing. I'd rather sit on a chair, look up in heaven, and say one sentence: God, I love you. Please love me. That's all. So what I want to ask you, what I want to try to get to is this subject is so deep, and I can see the people who joined. We all joined because it means something, but it's a deep subject. I wish there was a way we could do this every week, this lesson, because every 2 weeks, it seems a long time to wait for the next series, so to speak. You know, if you watch a series, you're chalishing to see the next episode, waiting 2 weeks. Is there any way at all we could change the format to actually having it every week? Oh, if everybody else is happy 2 weeks, disregard what I've said. But I get the...
One thing would be to ask everyone, but another thing would be to ask how much time and effort I can put into it.
I know.
I'm making a mental note of that, but for now, right now, I think we'll have to leave it the way it is.
Okay.
But I'm very happy that you're, keep on feeling free to raise your questions and your feelings. It's the only way to do it. If you can't be honest, you can't deal with anything.
I know, but it's a fine line. It's a fine line between us and also
Yes.
I don't in any way want to dominate the sessions. There's many other people who
Okay.
their thoughts through as well.
It's been fine. At least tonight it was fine.
Okay.
And it adds. And the way you present your questions, it adds to everyone's, feelings and interest. It's active. It's very important that it's not just passive. It has to be interaction.
I call it real.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to let you go, Rabbi. Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
As I say, Zagazint.
Zagazint to you too.
Bye.